This is the Food and Justice Podcast with Brenda Sanders.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to Food and Justice. I'm so excited about the show today. I have with me Dr. Lakshman Lucky Mulpuri, who I am so excited to have on the show. I've been wanting to have Lucky on the show for a while. We have some really interesting and important things to talk about on the show today. I want to just start off by reading Dr. Mulpuri's bio. And then we'll jump right into the questions. Dr. Lakshman Lucky Mulpuri graduated from the University of Michigan and Wayne State University School of Medicine. He has served as managing director for the 501c3 nonprofit organization Auntie Village in Detroit, a former president of the Plant-Based Nutrition Group, and the chief executive of PlantsNourish. He has been intimately involved in policy initiatives spanning the local, state, and federal levels, particularly focused on communities of color. He also developed and implemented the first ever mandatory plant-based medical curriculum for all 300 first-year medical students at Wayne State. Dr. Mulpuri's work has been featured in VegNews, Forks Over Knives, and numerous newspapers and television stations. As a community activist and a doctor, he is a strong proponent of the benefits whole food plant-based nutrition has for the community and the patients he serves. Wow. So that's a lot. And we're going to dig into all of it.
I'm excited
so much, Lucky, for being on this show.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm actually thrilled. I know we have been talking about this for some time and I'm looking forward to it.
Indeed. So we had a conversation recently and you said so much stuff that like blew my mind, right? And so we're going to talk about all of it.
Of course.
And I wanted to start with a phrase that you used in our last conversation, which was lunchroom to hospital pipeline. And I was just like, oh my gosh, because of course I'm doing like tons of social justice work. And so I know about, the school to prison pipeline and there's so much information out there about that. But this lunchroom to hospital pipeline just really, got my brain working. And I was just like, what is that? So can you go into what you mean when you use that phrase?
Well, I think it's, I think it's definitely an excellent conversation we had, Brenda. And our time, both, you in Baltimore and me in Detroit, which are both very similar stories and cities that share populations that have endured so much. The school to prison pipeline is something that we're very familiar with. But we oftentimes discount the effect that the environment can have on the health of many of the people that we serve, particularly in low-income communities of color that tend to be Black and brown. And it started to come more and more to my attention during medical school. 4 years of medical school, the first first year and a half are spent in classroom, in didactics. And then we spend time in the clinic. And, that is really the opportunity, especially in a city like Detroit, where you get to interact with people who, although you may think you know the city, you really don't. There's all kinds of stories that you hear from individuals about the hardships that they endure on a daily basis and the successes they've also thankfully enjoyed. But one thing that started to become painfully clear to me as I continued my clinical rotations and as I continue to see people not only within the hospital or the clinic, but in the very neighborhoods they called home when I worked at Auntie Village, was the fact that people are oftentimes set up to fail. And it's very frustrating oftentimes when we talk about health, especially of our more vulnerable communities. All you have to do is go to the majority of hospital cafeterias and look at what they're serving. And oftentimes it's surprising. It's almost as if we don't actually want to promote the health of our patients in a way that ensures that they can live the best quality of life that they can achieve. And I tell every patient that I see, whether it's in the emergency room or whether it's the outpatient clinic, I love seeing you, but I know you don't want to see me, and I definitely don't want to see you here again. Yeah. And I think that's really what medicine is all about. Thomas Edison had an excellent quote that the doctor of the future essentially will be concerned not with just modern medicine, but about all aspects that affect their patient's care. Now, I may butcher the quote a little, but I think that's really, I think, where medicine should be going. And I'm looking forward to being part of that generation of physicians that really looks at how do we prevent young kids, young adults, and even people in the 30s, 40s, 50s from ever getting to a position where they require invasive procedures and significantly debilitating medication that can harm their interactions with their loved ones and their communities and their lives for probably the rest of their life. So when I say, lunchroom to hospital pipeline, I really mean breaking this strong tie that exists between environmental impact and subsequent healthcare costs and the psychological and financial burden that families have to bear in inner cities.
Wow. Okay. You know what you reminded me of when you were talking about the foods that are available in the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
My mother, who has since passed, she had open heart surgery.
Right.
And I was coming in the next morning to bring food because that was my thing. It was just like, I'm gonna take care of the food.
Right.
And when I got there, she said that she had already eaten.
Right.
And what she had eaten was bacon and eggs.
Right.
So the hospital that had just performed open heart surgery on my mother fed her bacon and eggs the next day. It was, I couldn't believe it. Like, and I know the system and I know how the system works. And I still was just floored that they would, feed somebody who just suffered a heart attack, the same food that gave her the heart attack. It's disorienting. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. So,
and I think what's interesting is, when we talk about this, it's a very American philosophy, I've noticed, in that, we have a lot of excellent opportunities here in the United States, and our access to healthcare, although complicated, still the technological things that we're able to achieve is truly remarkable. And I oftentimes tell friends and family and, people I work with in the community, just 200 years ago, we were cutting people to hurt them. And now we're able to cut into people to prolong their lives 10 to 15, 20 years. It's truly remarkable how much doctors are able to accomplish. When within recent memory, we couldn't even conceive that being possible. But again, it's this disconnect that occurs between the things that we're able to do to help people and then the things that we need to do to prevent people from ever needing to be in that position. And as I'm sure you saw with your mother, an open heart surgery is not like replacing, the faucet in your sink. It is a very difficult process that requires hours and hours of rehabilitation, strong mental fortitude. And oftentimes people are met with many challenges along the way that they didn't anticipate. And I personally have been in open heart surgeries and I've seen what we do to patients. And it is truly remarkable to me, again, what we can do. But I would have loved if that patient never had to get there in the first place. And as you know, the bacon and eggs is a great example. If someone needs open heart surgery, a bypass is not going to do the trick. We've maybe fixed one problem, but the overarching pathogenesis of why that person needed open heart surgery, ultimately in a Western diet, has not been addressed. And, I am encouraged by the fact that one of my mentors, Dr. Robert Osfeld at Montefiore, developed an excellent inpatient cardiovascular nutrition program where not only was he able to talk with patients about the benefits of a plant-based diet, but he very directly on that floor was able to give patients the actual food that he was talking about and show people, right? It's all about showing. Yes. A plate of food tells 1,000 words more than anything that I could tell someone. And being able to show people this is what healthier food looks like, I think is critical. And I think in the background as well on television, they'll have forks over knives running on a constant loop. And then that way we're talking about a more holistic perspective where every aspect of the patient's care is really with the intention of ensuring that they don't have to return to the hospital, or at the very least don't have to suffer as many significant complications from not altering their lifestyle.
This is some radical stuff that we're talking about. I mean,
I know, but that's what change is, right?
Yes.
It's slow, but it requires a certain degree of radicalism.
I'll tell you what, I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful. I feel really good. I back, 8 years ago,
right.
I never would have thought that I would feel this hopeful, that I would know so many plant-based doctors and, like that you would be promoting the plant-based diet to patients. And it's just, it's beautiful. And I'm so excited.
And I'm fortunate to it. And and I can speak personally, I'm very fortunate to have seen how many trailblazers have really taken the brunt of it from such an early standpoint. throughout the years, and established this as a more defined field within medicine that everybody should be talking about, whether you're an eye doctor, a bone doctor, or a family practice physician or internal medicine doctor. Nutrition should be an important component of your tool belt.
I hope that.
And every patient should know about it too. I think, that's,
absolutely.
Every patient should know about it as well.
Well, I'm trying. I'm working hard.
I know you out there. I mean, I really know you out there, Brenda. So, I'm seeing all the videos of the pictures. So I could appreciate, you're the ground pounder. And truthfully, people like you, I think the community advocates have the most impact, if not more, than their physicians, because you understand what it's like for what people are going through and you meet them where they're at. And I think as great as medicine is, oftentimes we can do more to meet people where they're at, which is why, I got so involved in the community and in the neighborhoods outside of Midtown and downtown Detroit, because, from a personal perspective, that's where people live. People don't live in the poppin' areas. People who really need the help, they need people to come to them. And just being there in person, I'm sure you've seen more than a few times, makes all the difference.
So you've mentioned in the same conversation that we had, you used the phrase racial oppression through dietary restrictions. Right. And at the time when I heard it, I assumed that you meant that in certain populations or that certain populations have restricted access to healthy foods. Is that what you meant?
Yes, that. And I also think, interestingly, something that has become increasingly more salient to me because of the influences from doctors such as Dr. Batiste, who I consider a dear friend, and Dr. Milton Mills as well, both of whom you and I spoke with when we were back in Kansas City last year, and who have excellent views. I was really inspired by their deeper discussions of where dietary habits of particularly African Americans and even more non-Eurocentric cultures have developed and how they've developed. And it's very fascinating to me to see how the food system has been designed in this almost perfectly optimal way to ensure that individuals are constantly inundated with unhealthy messaging, a lack of healthy options, and more importantly, an inability to actually discern healthier choices that stem from their actual cultural roots. But the current industry has done such a good job subverting people's expectations of what food is and what food might be for them, that it's difficult for individuals, especially in areas where education, nutritional literacy might not be as prominent. These individuals tend to struggle a little more to make the healthier choices necessary. And we as providers have oftentimes missed the mark as well.
Absolutely. It's so frustrating. It really is, because, one of the things that I see in my work, because I do a lot of plant-based food advocacy, right, is that the information about the benefits to eating plant-based food oftentimes makes its way into the communities that aren't even being targeted with the unhealthy foods. And so these folks, again, have the privilege of not only not being targeted in their communities, but of having this information filter into them first, into their community. And it's so frustrating because you can see the racism built into the system. It's so clear.
And the interesting thing too is, there's a really fascinating study. I can't remember the particular details. I read it a long time ago, but essentially they compared an African-American population in the South. I think it was Georgia, somewhere in Georgia, maybe Tennessee. And they compared it to a similar population in an African country, maybe Zimbabwe. I can't remember specifically. And they found the Zimbabwean population or whatever the population was that was looked at from that African country had significantly lower rates of colon cancer, significantly reduced rates of Alzheimer's. And all that was really different between the two populations, obviously, besides the environments that were built, but what was controlled for the most part, I guess. But dietary consumption was really the big differentiating factor. And to see such stark differences in an area that America would traditionally consider to be impoverished, particularly because it's Africa, but also because they tend to be of a darker skin complexion. These people tend to actually have better health outcomes than their American counterparts, which goes to show that maybe everything that we consider to be American isn't of our true roots. And truthfully, finding ways to engage people in alternative cuisines that may be more linked to their roots than previously discussed can be beneficial for improving health overall.
Yes, absolutely. And I try to incorporate a lot of traditional foods into the cooking demos and, the foods that I introduce to folks, because people really do recognize these foods, even
Right.
if it's just like, oh, this is what I used to eat when I would visit my grandmother in the South
Right.
during the
Right.
summer when I
Right.
was, growing up.
Sure.
Folks recognize the foods and oftentimes have like a positive feeling associated with those foods as well.
Food is love. Food is love. It really is.
Can I
It
quote you on
is.
that? Okay.
Of course. Food is love.
I
mean,
love that.
Food and Justice is made possible with support from Defund Big Meat, a grassroots effort to encourage strategic collaboration across all sectors of global justice. Find more information about Defund Big Meat at defundbigmeat.org. A Well-Fed World, an international hunger relief and food justice organization advancing plant-based foods and farming to create a nourished and climate-friendly future. Find out more about A Well-Fed World at awfw.org. Better Food Foundation, an organization that promotes dietary changes to build a healthy, equitable, humane, and environmentally sustainable food system. You can find out more about Better Food Foundation at betterfoodfoundation.org. And Farm Sanctuary, a farmed animal sanctuary working to fight the disastrous effects of animal agriculture on animals, the environment, social justice, and public health through rescue, education, and advocacy. Find out more about Farm Sanctuary at farmsanctuary.org.
You talked about this concept called decision fatigue,
right,
which I thought was so fascinating.
Right.
And you said that it can lead people to make unhealthy choices. Can you explain decision fatigue?
Right. So, I think obviously decision fatigue is not a term that I came up with, or, it's one that's been bounced around quite a bit. And it applies a little more to, I think, lifestyle decision making in general beyond just nutrition. But I think it's something that's very plain when you look at any inner city environment. Baltimore is a great example, and Detroit are great examples, just because our two cities share so many characteristics. But when I see, what I see and what people obviously know already is there are so many different things in an individual's life, particularly when financial means aren't as easy to access. Transportation services may be more difficult, and all these various stresses throughout a period of time. How am I going to get money to pay rent? Am I going to be able to afford water? Oh no, my water's been shut off, right? I can't afford electricity. How am I supposed to get my kids to school? The bus hasn't been running efficiently. And in Detroit, public transportation is a major problem, and only 1 in 3 people don't have cars in Detroit. And this is a city with no real public transit. So all these little stresses that exist in the environment, and we haven't even talked about the stresses of racism and inherent racism that exist within cultures that have been so segregated, like Detroit and Baltimore. All these small things can build up to making it difficult to put the effort and energy necessary for people to make healthier habits. And this isn't to mention the healthcare effects that they've noticed by visiting their doctor. They have high blood pressure, they have high cholesterol, they're not able to breathe as well at night because they have maybe a larger or obese habits. This is what we call in medicine. They're a little larger, and so they have trouble sleeping at night because their pharyngeal tissue, and I'm getting a little too medical here, essentially they're not able to breathe at night. They're not able to breathe at night. And there's all these different varying factors that are so frustrating to see, because you understand this is why people are unable to make healthier decisions, because there's so many other difficult problems that they have to endure on a daily basis in ways that even I'm privileged to admit that I don't have to encounter as much. And all these different decisions make it hard that when the time comes and I need to choose something healthier, what am I going to choose? The thing I know I like that's going to bring me some degree of enjoyment, or am I going to do something completely different that I'm uncomfortable with, at the local grocery store, the local corner store, and maybe it's WIC-approved foods, maybe it's a little more affordable, but I don't really know how to do it. And I think most people in that situation would go for something that's comfortable, they're familiar with, and it's easy to access. And that is what the system has been designed to work on. And they've done a great job at it, as we've seen over the past few decades. They've done an excellent job hitting that mark. You just have to drive down any inner city and you tell me how many grocery stores you see, how many farmers markets. And I'll admit, Detroit's done a lot better in farmer markets and urban gardening over the years. But you tell me how many fast food restaurants you see, and then how many places you see that offer fresh produce in a culturally specific way. And I bet you most people are very familiar with that quandary.
Yeah. My goodness. I mean, I grew up that way. I mean,
Right.
just we didn't even have a grocery store, and
Right.
so I mean, the options were slim.
Slim.
And you know, and having to try to figure out how to eat something nourishing from
Right.
what people have to choose from. It's just we gotta figure this out. Lucky.
I agree.
I
agree. I know, Brenda, and if I could get 1,000 of you, I'd find someone to clone you. But unfortunately, I don't think we've got there yet. But you know, the more people like you and me, I think the better off the advocacy will get.
Yeah, I think there's like 7 more. So, you know, like the 9 of us get together.
Right. We all get together and do something. I agree. And maybe get a little more paid for it. But yeah, you know, besides that, there's a little more money for it. But
that would be nice.
Yeah.
All right. So I mentioned the PlantsNourish program. You were involved in efforts to study nutrition in a community context. Right. What does that look like, and what are the potential benefits of a program like this one?
Right. So my time at Auntie, so just for a brief overview for your listeners, you may not be familiar, obviously, Auntie Village is a smaller nonprofit on the west side of Detroit in a neighborhood known as Narden Park. So Detroit separating to the west side and the east side, and Woodward, that is usually the delineating factor there. But so Narden Park is an interesting neighborhood because it lacks a lot of access to resources that its surrounding neighborhoods do have. And Auntie, who is in fact a real person, has spent decades, both of herself and her family, providing services informally to the community, whether it's emergency shelter, food services for those in need, clothing, etc. And so Auntie started to become a formal organization with the support of local students. And when I arrived at that time, I originally started as a student and then transitioned into an actual community activist and leader within the organization beyond my role as a student volunteer. And, you know, the one thing I'll say that Auntie has demonstrated, and I hope will continue to demonstrate, is you can teach healthier eating habits in communities that tend to not have access to resources. And I'll tell you, Brenda, something that frustrates me a lot, and I tend to see this in individuals who may not have as significant of a grasp of what people are capable of, tend to write off individuals who have a little darker pigment in poorer areas as being unable or unwilling to make decisions necessary to improve their health. And I see it time and time again. I hear it all the time. Yeah. And nothing frustrates me more when people don't have the belief that others want to better themselves and their family's health. And I've seen it personally. We've had local plant-based health coaches, Mark Ramirez and Kim Ramirez. They formed the group Chickpea and Bean. They're an excellent story, and anybody who's interested, I highly recommend to look them up on their website, chickpeaandbean.org. But they have come out to the community and provided healthy eating living workshops. And my purpose, and our purpose, Mark's purpose and my purpose, was to have ingredients sourced from every local corner store. There's a lot of WIC-approved foods that you can find in corner stores, that you can make a very easy salsa, you can make a very easy rice and beans bowl, all things that you can get from the local corner store and hopefully supplement with farmers markets. And I know Detroit, particularly in the past 5 to 10 years, has started to develop a booming urban farm movement that has really been focused on grassroots community events where every neighborhood will have someone involved in a community gardening process. And obviously Auntie is one of those. And so for me, when we talk about accessibility is what we make it. Do people have, unfortunately, more barriers to accessing care and proper nutrition? Of course, no one should be discounting that. But can we do more to meet people where they're at instead of just writing them off as a group that is unwilling to make healthcare changes? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm tired of being told by others that it's not worth the time, because it is.
I mean, I was told when I decided to start doing food justice activism, and I knew where I was going to go back to where I came from. I was told that I was wasting my time. I was told that, you know, they're not going to care about that. They don't care about their health. They're never going to, you know, eat healthy. I was told all these things, and I'm just stubborn. So, so I just decided, you know, okay, well, maybe you're right, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And what I found was that all of it wasn't, like, none of it was true.
None of it's true.
I mean, people, if anything, people just didn't know.
They didn't
know.
That
was it. Right. That was it. Once people knew the things that they were learning through the workshops and the classes and things, they were just like, okay, so now what do I do? And that was all. They just wanted to know, okay, now what?
Right.
And then I had to figure out how to tell them now what, because
yeah, once you get them there, you're like, uh-oh. right.
Yeah, initially it was just like I was just imparting information. I didn't know I had to like help you do it. But once that, was established, it was just like, oh, I mean, I like people who just like were so excited to learn how to make healthy food for their kids. Agreed. It just made my heart swell.
It's gratifying.
It was it was so wonderful to know that like all those people who were just trying to write off these poor Black and brown people, they were all wrong. They were all wrong.
People in these communities need empowerment and not pity. And I'm tired of seeing that. I'm tired of it. It bothers me a lot. And unfortunately, healthcare has this issue significantly as well, where, there have been a number of studies done on physician perceptions and mid-level provider perceptions towards patients and their ability to change. And this is extending beyond communities of color, where oftentimes we discount our patients' ability or interest in making a lifestyle change. And oftentimes prescribe them in a way that may seem consistent with a more Western philosophy. And by that, I mean more traditional pharmaceutical or interventional. And this is not to say that those are not very useful routes for medicine. And people do need those routes in certain situations. But, everybody, I think, far discounts a person's ability to change. And we can do more to at least encourage them. And I understand not everybody's going to change. I get it. But I'd be remiss if we didn't at least attempt to provide people with the information necessary to set them up for success. And that is what we need to do time and time again, whether it's in the clinics, the hospitals, or if it's in the communities and churches that people call their neighborhoods. Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad to see the work that you're doing, because I say all time and time again, the real people that make the difference are the grassroots leaders. All they need is the necessary financial support to make it happen, because they already know what they're doing is right. Right. You don't need to go in and reinvent the wheel and tell people all these things they need to do. No, people have been doing good work and have been doing it for decades and centuries even. They just need the assistance necessary to continue making that good work happen.
Yes. And you're right. So many people. I mean, since I've been doing this show, I have met so many people and heard so many stories of folks who are just on the ground like you, in Detroit, just doing this work, and nobody would ever know. Right. I mean, luckily, Auntie Nays was written up in VegNews and other places, but how many projects out there are just folks are just struggling, trying to help other people out of the kindness of their heart, and they're getting no publicity about it. They're getting no support. And so I'm hoping that through this show and, my organization, Afro Vegan Society, we'll be able to find more people and just connect them with the resources and support that they need, because that's so important.
Right. And there's a reason why in the plant-based movement, I think particularly, I guess, the vegan movement, but if we're talking more medically, the plant-based movement, one of the largest, fastest growing segments is African Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a reason for this. And I think, again, there's misconceptions about where the usefulness of this derives. And as somebody who is not from this country, and I am from this country, but my roots don't trace back here. It is oftentimes surprising to me when people tell me about the infeasibility of plant-based diets, when my ancestors and people who look like you and me have been doing it for centuries in their home countries without even a single thought.
Yep.
And it's fascinating. It really is, because it goes back to discounting people's ability to embrace their heritage and their culture and make the significant changes necessary to ensure the health of themselves and their family.
This is good stuff, Lucky.
I'm glad. I told you, didn't I? We'd be having good fun. I told you.
Yes. Yes. So you mentioned that there are areas of Detroit that aren't necessarily food deserts, but instead they are food swamps. And I know that there are a lot of folks who are watching who may not know the distinction between the two. So can you kind of break that down for us?
Sure. So, interestingly, food desert, I think, is a term that's commonly known to many of us. The USDA defines it in a very specific manner. It's, I think, either by poverty line. So how many residents within a certain census tract meet a certain poverty threshold. And then distance is another thing that plays into the definition as well. Distance to a grocery store, or I think a similar seeming organization that provides fresh produce, meat, dairy, et cetera, in the USDA's context. Interestingly, in Detroit, there's actually very few parts of Detroit that fit this USDA definition of food deserts. And so interestingly, and more increasingly in discussions around Detroit, the term food swamps has popped up. What this essentially means, and this goes back to our discussion about decision fatigue, Brenda, is that when we talk about environments, it's not simply the fact that there's a lack of in food, as there is in food deserts. Food swamps there actually is an accessible amount of grocery stores, farmers markets, and places to obtain produce and other healthier and better vegetables, fruits, et cetera. But more importantly, people are unable to make the decisions necessary to ensure a healthier lifestyle. And that's either decision fatigue, that's poor nutritional literacy, there may be inaccessibility of their culture and its relativeness to plant-based nutrition. And so I think this is a great place that we can really meet people at. And this is already stuff that you're doing with Afro-Vegan Society and your work in Baltimore. This is really where I think the battle is showing people that it is very possible, it's feasible, and they might even enjoy it, because I promise you, after a few weeks, people feel a lot differently on a plant-based diet, or at least tending towards a more plant-based diet after 30 days than they'd ever expect. And this is something you've experienced, and when I heard your talk in Kansas City that very intimately, and even with your family, it's something intimately as well. And that's why I always try to encourage patients and just people in general is try it. You have nothing to lose. And unfortunately, some people just don't know how to try it, especially in these areas. And that is where the maximum amount of utility and the benefit can be derived.
The Food and Justice Podcast is proud to be organizational partners with Afro-Vegan Society, Food Empowerment Project, Grow Where You Are, and Vine Sanctuary.
You just made me think about the fact that here in Baltimore, there was maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe not even that long, there was this explosion of community gardens and farmers markets and stuff. And some of these farmers markets are straight up in the hood. 2 blocks away from the hood, really, really close. But everybody at the farmer's market is white driving a hybrid. I swear to God, where are the people from this community? They're not at this farmer's market, and it makes no sense. These folks are driving in from outside the city to come to this farmer's market, and yet there is nobody is pulling in the folks from the community. And so it's just it's not a if you build it they will come situation. You have to engage. You have to connect with people, network with the folks. And and so when I was involved with some folks, we wanted to build a community garden. I lived in this community called Penn North, which was adjacent to the community where Freddie Gray was killed. And so the hood. And so, I wanted to build this garden, and I wanted it to be open and accessible to everybody in the community, but they didn't know me. Who
is you? Right.
I just started going door to door and just, I put together this survey, and I was just if there was a community garden in this community,
would you use
what do you like? Collard greens, cabbage, what do you want me to grow? Would you like to come out and be a part of this process? And it worked. It worked. I mean, by mid-season, I would say maybe July or so, the whole community was taking part. The kids were out there, the grandparents were out there telling us that we were doing everything wrong. It was great. And it was just, the parents would come out, and it was a great situation. And so you can't, it's not just if we put this thing, if we come in from outside and put this thing in their community, they're just gonna appreciate it, and want to be a part of it. You have to build. That's what community organizing is, is building community. And so I really appreciate what you're saying, has been going on in Detroit. Detroit and Baltimore do actually sound very
similar. Yeah. Very similar. Yeah. And it's interesting. It goes back to food is love.
Yeah.
When people feel like they have skin in the game,
Mm.
like this is their project, this is their neighborhood, this is their community, and they're doing it together, you cannot tell me that people won't come through. You
It's
cannot tell me
so
that.
true. Yes.
Who doesn't want to see that come together? You know what I'm saying? And Detroit, there was this, I remember, for a long time, Detroit was never a big grocery store place by these huge grocery stores. There was a lot of smaller independent chains. But Whole Foods came, I can't remember how long ago, it feels like a lifetime ago. Whole Foods came, plopped itself down in Midtown. And it was kind of like this prime example to me of this fallacy, because remember, you and I talked about food deserts and food swamps. Policy, as you know very well on the ground, and it's something that I spend time with, is nuanced, right? Nothing is ever black and white. It requires some gray, right? That's why I love the field of medicine. It's a gray field. We do the best we can, but nothing is black and white. And every provider will tell their patient that we do the best we can. But when we talk about policy and we talk about the difference between food deserts and food swamps, just because you think there isn't enough grocery stores doesn't mean putting 14 to 50 more grocery stores will fix the problem.
Nope.
And that is what it's about, meeting people where they're at. And I love that's what you did. You went door to door and you asked people, what do you want? Yeah. It's a simple question. You don't need to have a 40, 50 page survey asking people all their dietary preferences and what they're interested in and right. It's a very simple question. If we put up an apple tree, would you use it? Right? That's all it takes. And I love it. It's a simple answer, right? It's like Occam's razor. It's very simple. Yeah. That's all. The simplest answer is often the solution. And it's so encouraging for me to see initiatives like that just happening everywhere, especially in a place that looks a lot like Detroit.
It really is. And there are other cities just like ours where the same kind of work is happening. There's folks over in Oakland. There's people in Chicago. I mean, I feel really very hopeful and optimistic that things are starting to turn around, and luckily it's kind of like the issue, like the trending issue right now is food justice.
Food justice.
I'm not mad about that. I mean,
yeah, no. I mean, I'll take it every day. It makes my job easier and your job easier because we don't have to explain what the term means.
Yes.
Right.
So people care about our issue right now. Let's capitalize on that. That's where I'm at.
Definitely.
Right. So the activism that you and I are engaged in involves, and you just mentioned this, giving people the tools that they need to transition to plant-based eating, to vegan living. Why do you think that is so important? I know why I think that it's so important. Why do you think that it's so important to give people the tools that they need to transition? It's a great question, Brenda. Medicine is a very interesting field because of the people who are attracted to it and the good work they can do. We oftentimes think in terms of incidence and prevalence of disease. We think in terms of numbers. We think of the ability to make people's lives better, because at the end of the day, as a provider, you're using statistics and you're using the best research available to you to inform your decision-making as a provider, and more importantly, provide your patients with the best possible outcome. But the reason I got into this game and why it appealed to me so much when we talk about nutrition and we talk about plant-based nutrition in particular, I don't want someone to miss out on a good 10 to 15 years of quality life with their loved ones. Life is short. And as somebody who has seen people die on the table, I know that firsthand. Life is short. Yeah. And it's interesting because, again, I alluded to this earlier. It's a very American philosophy that quantity is better than quality. Everybody says, I don't mind dropping dead at 65. I don't mind eating whatever I want to do and doing whatever I want to do until I die. Well, as someone who has seen it firsthand, you don't just pass away happily in your sleep. It's a very long, painful process. It's incredibly burdensome, not only on yourself, but more importantly, the ones that you call family and the ones who will have to take care of you. It puts yourself in a compromising position. And as Americans, I think we're all very used to being independent. And that can be debilitating, that loss of self, and more importantly, the loss of quality of life that we're all accustomed to enjoying. So to sum it up, why do I care?
humanism. That's why. That's what I mean. When we talk about humanism in medicine, I mean, I see people not as just the patients that need to be treated, but as individuals who have lives, meaningful lives, regardless of whether or not I understand it, and who want to continue working in that space and enjoying the time that they have with their family while they're here on this planet. My grandmother passed away very, very young from a heart condition that was preventable. I lost my father to prostate cancer, my grandfather to prostate cancer just a month ago. And so these, and I'm not the only one. I know I'm not the only one. As hard as it is to see all this, we'll all cherish the memories of our family members more than anything. And I would bet you most people would give anything to have just another 6 months with their loved ones. Just another 6 months of good conversation and laughs and birthday parties and, everything under the sun. And that's why I think it's so important. It's not, my economics major tells me this is how much we'd save in terms of losses of productivity and how much we'd save on healthcare costs and how much we would save on pharmaceutical usage. I mean, that's all well and good, and that's incredibly important. And we haven't even touched upon the environmental conservatism that I think is becoming more salient as time has passed. But it's about people's ability to continue to feel like themselves. It's about their quality of life. And I think that's really why I care about it so deeply.
That is beautiful. More doctors like you, please.
No. I was fortunate. I had an excellent mother and father, and I've seen the struggle firsthand. And so that's informed a lot of my life. And it's why I think I want to do what I want to do.
Well, I want you to do what you want to do.
I appreciate that. But I mean, I would like to just kick it on an island for 10, 15 years, but I don't think my conscience would allow it.
No, indeed.
Yeah.
So dairy.
Yes.
Here's the thing.
Right.
I have a particular axe to grind with the dairy industry, and I'm still kind of working through it because I know that there are, it goes beyond the fact that I was extremely lactose intolerant I was on the extreme end of the spectrum. When I was a baby, an infant, my family members used to call me that crying baby. They did.
I was too, actually. I'll tell you about it after, but that was me too. And look where we ended up, right? Look where we ended up.
Right. So. All I did was cry and cry and cry, unless I was asleep. If I was awake, I was crying. And that my mom would take me to the doctor, and they would be like, "Oh, we don't know." Even one doctor. I tell this story. One pediatrician told my mother, "Well, Black babies just cry more."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen some quiet Black babies too, though. So I don't know about that one, but I've seen plenty who look at me like they don't even want to talk. So I don't know about that. Yeah.
So one doctor just suggested that she try non-dairy formula.
Right.
And she went and got the non-dairy formula, and I immediately stopped crying.
Right.
And so I just say that to say that I was so lactose intolerant, and I mean all the way up until I went vegan.
Right.
So I do have this specific issue with the dairy industry, but I know it goes deeper than just my own personal pain.
Sure.
And it goes into just the cruelty of the industry and, just the way that Black people specifically are targeted by the industry. And so you had talked about how the dairy industry uses public policy and advertising specifically to influence people's dietary choices. And I've been seeing it my whole life. What do you see as the best ways to push back on that influence?
Right. It's a good question. I think I've thought about this quite a bit. And if we're talking about this from a political sense, because unfortunately everything is politics, we need to make the issue much clearer that the dairy industry's impact on the average American's health goes beyond that of profits. It goes beyond that of good old American got milk ads. This is an issue of racial insensitivity and oftentimes severe malignance towards certain groups of non-Eurocentric backgrounds. And the language may sound strong, But all you have to do is look at the persistence or the prevalence of lactose intolerance among communities of color. And ranging from African Americans to Hispanics to Asians, the percent of lactose intolerance tends from 75% to all the way up to 95% of these populations are lactose intolerant. And that's not a mistake. That's not a mistake. There's a reason why we're not supposed to be drinking cow's milk. It's because it's meant for a baby cow.
Right.
And I don't think anybody can dispute that to me. I don't think anybody's going to come to me and tell me that a baby cow isn't meant to drink that milk. And that persistence of the lactase gene that we see tends to degenerate and ultimately disappear because it's the natural thing to do in babies. At a certain point, we're weaned off formula in modern society or breastfeeding, which is the better version, obviously, of getting nutrition. But once we get off of that, we don't really need to go back. And if you look at trends of lactose intolerance among more Eurocentric societies, far lower. I think somewhere between 10 to 25%. It's much lower. But the societies that have been built oftentimes that we unfortunately have come to know and very much relish tend to be of a more Eurocentric background. And this is both in environmental policy, and something that's very obvious to now is animal agricultural subsidization, where the animal agricultural industry enjoys tens of 20 of billions of dollars of taxpayer money, more than the oil industry even. I think it's to the tune of about 70 or 80 billion dollars go towards the animal agricultural industry in the United States. When, although, it's oftentimes depicted as very folksy and this discussion of, good old American sensibilities and ranchers, the majority of the space is actually dominated by large factory farms that are hosted by large companies, huge corporations that have incredible impacts on the communities that those slaughterhouses and those dairy farms call home, higher rates of violence, of violent behavior in those communities due to the PTSD and trauma of those work and agricultural forces, and something that extends beyond to the environmental impacts of these areas, whether it's disruption of ecosystems there or pollution that exists. And obviously, as you and I well know, it extends far beyond into our communities. Whether it's Black or brown or even white, people very much suffer the consequences of a very robust dairy industry that many of the Western nations tend to employ, everywhere from Europe to Canada. And Canada, whose MP is vegan, Justin Trudeau, even Canada has a very significant dairy lobby. And so, it's fascinating because when we talk about how to fight back, if I had one decision, if I had one choice, it'd be to eliminate animal agricultural subsidies, because these industries are largely unprofitable without the support of taxpayer dollars, whether or not we want to admit it. I think if anybody, I was talking to my friend about this last night, if any American found out that we were giving the amount of money we do to these industries and you just replace that industry with Pepsi, people would be livid. People would say, how are you giving my money to support this corporation? And obviously, something we see very clearly is they'll take these products that are now the demand of which is dropping, and they're still attempting to keep the price and the profit margins nice and healthy. They'll force these into our school lunches. You have to look at any Black and brown school lunch. What do we see the most? I see a carton of dairy milk on every kid's plate. And yeah, maybe these kids have milder forms of lactose intolerance. Maybe they have major forms of lactose intolerance. Either way, we know just based on the numbers and the degree of lactose intolerance in these societies that these kids are going to be affected. They won't be able to focus as much in school. They might have more abdominal issues. And the problem is people get so used to this, they don't realize that there's an alternative way, that they don't have to feel this way. Even I was one of those people. I just forced myself to lactose for years, because especially in my culture, in Indian culture, and my country's home, which was subjugated and enslaved by the British for a couple of years, dairy was heavily brought into my country. And although we had it in small amounts, it was nowhere near the level that was imposed onto the country once it became, entrapped or I guess colonialized by the British. So all this to say, I think it's interesting because I spent a lot of time reading about some very interesting theses on the Eurocentric backings of animal agriculture and how it was used to spread colonialism. It was yet another tool, obviously, in addition to slavery, in addition to all other methods they employed, infectious diseases they accidentally used to wipe out the Native American population here for the most part. Animal agriculture was a huge component of that. It was a huge component of that. And so when we talk about what we can do now It's to frame this issue in the way it needs to be framed, which is this is an issue of racial justice that extends beyond us talking about your oat milk latte at Starbucks. This is a major issue that affects people of color who are already vulnerable in so many different ways. And it really should focus on what more can we do to ensure that these kids have the best possible ability to succeed in life. And that's trying to improve as many environmental impediments as we possibly can to ensure their success. Because as you and I know, it is a miracle anybody can get out of these cities when you see how much the average child in an inner city has to go up against. It is a miracle that any of them are able to leave, because everything is designed from day one to make their lives significantly more difficult. So I went off a little there. I know. But I've been thinking about this for a while because, Dr. Mills and I have been working on writing a letter with Switch for Good to the USDA's Equity Commission to encourage the removal of dairy milk, or at the very least, the offering of alternative plant-based milks in lunches for all children, particularly children of color.
And, people aren't talking about this, or at least not enough people. This is this is important when you're talking about a staple in the American diet is a racial justice issue. I mean, come on, no, everybody should be talking about this, and they're not. So that's why we have to do this show.
We have to.
Somebody
has to. Right. I mean, and I think, you and I had mentioned on our first talk, our preliminary talk, about, one of the initiatives I was working with for the HBCU CPLM, the physicians for College of Physicians for Lifestyle Medicine. That's the organization, HBCU CPLM. It's a long acronym, I know. But, one of the things we were working on was offering plant-based options in a pilot method to Maryland Correctional Facility inmates, who you and I both know are heavily Black. And one of the interesting things that I noticed was both sides, whether it be Democrat or Republican, mind you, Maryland is one of the more blue states in the country. So both sides had issues with this legislation, particularly that we'd be doing something as radical as offering better nutritional options to inmates who, if anybody listening to this podcast knows the kind of stuff that these men and women receive in those correctional facilities, it's horrendous. Yeah. It's abhorrent that this is how we treat a citizen of the United States, regardless of the crime that they've committed, because they are still people. And how we treat our most vulnerable is a reflection of the country overall. Yeah. And I think, to me, what was most fascinating, and I'd come to the realization, is that this is such a hard issue to navigate, because the people that you traditionally would think on your side are on your side aren't always, because money runs deep. These industries have a lot of money. They have a lot to lose. And, don't get me wrong, Big Kale, which doesn't really exist, but Big Kale, which, has maybe a little skin in the game, these guys have everything. These people have everything. And so when you see it firsthand, that people that you expect to be in support of legislation like this are not, and then subsequently prevented from leaving committee, it makes you increasingly worried about how this issue has manifested in the state of national, federal politics, state level politics, and even local politics. And this was a pilot study, Brenda. This wasn't us saying that every correctional facility and every hospital in the state of Maryland needs plant-based options. It was a pilot study for prisoners interested in opting in to this. And the cost was the same. There was no difference in cost between the items. And the idea was that we tried to reduce the nearly $350 million or so that is incurred by the Maryland Correctional Facilities usage of emergency services in the state. And so, like you said, this is a hard battle. And you know this and I know this. And no matter where you look, unfortunately, the people who we would think would be right along with us, we need to educate as to how this is an issue in the first place. Because you and I both know people will look at you real weird when you start saying that this is a racial issue. Yeah. People will look at you real strange when you say that this is a social justice issue. Yeah. And so that is what's really fascinating. And I think that's where a lot of our work remains.
Absolutely. And I'm starting to feel like it's going to have to come from the people. And that's probably like, it's like, duh, but you still, there's some part of you that still feels like our elected officials are actually looking out for us, but then something like this pilot program comes along and you're like, oh, wait, maybe they're not.
It's discouraging.
Yeah.
It's discouraging. Right.
Yeah.
It has to come from the people. And like you said, grassroots, ground up operations.
Yeah.
That is what's going to make the difference, because if everybody in their community has some stake or feeling of belief that fruits and vegetables are important and that their kids should be eating more fruits and vegetables, they will hold their representatives equally accountable.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, we could go on and on about the state of American politics, but it's the system we have right now and the system we have to work in. And people have far more power with their wallets than they think they do. And if you demonstrate where you think is important and what you think is important for the health of your children and for future generations, this is the best space to be in. And we're not, again, all we talk about nowadays is a lot of issues that have to deal with the economic or environmental consequences of dietary habits.
Mm-hmm.
So, what was the big Amazon fire? That was because people were clearing forests for animal agricultural operations.
Yep.
And so there's these, and this isn't for me to say that, oftentimes people who hear me speak or that I'll talk to believe that I think plant-based nutrition is a panacea, a cure-all. I don't. I think it has tremendous usefulness, and it's probably one of the most effective tools we have in our toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it's not even being mentioned as being in that box. So let alone being taken out. And I think, I've alluded to this on previous podcasts and, on television, but your average doctor gets less than 40 hours of nutritional education. And much of that is not clinically relevant. And we can do more. Do more. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the way the system is, but that's not to say that we can't do more, which is why, the medical curriculum that we created, that was important to me, because, I hope to plant the seed at the very least that people will see their 10,000th type 2 diabetes patient and wonder, didn't I see a story of that one guy, Mark Ramirez, who reversed his type 2 diabetes? I swear I saw that somewhere. Maybe I'll look into it, right? You can't change the whole system, but people have far more agency in their health and their ability to be healthy than they are led to believe. And we can do more showing them that.
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many people who just sort of found out about our programming in Baltimore and decided to come because we give away free food. They just showed up and went through the program. Usually it's like a 4-week program. I try to do at least 4 weeks so that people can really experience the positive benefits of eating, differently. And how many people at the end of the program would stand up and say, my high blood pressure is better. My doctor is adjusting my diabetes medication. This stuff that's just whoa, I wasn't expecting it. Right.
That's a few days.
And these people to this day, and it's been, maybe 8 or 10 years since they went through the program, and they to this day attribute this information with changing their lives forever. And it is just, I don't know why no one has done a documentary about me and my work. Come on.
Well, Brenda, the more you say it, we might have to go get one. I wouldn't mind hosting it. We'll get one. Let me talk to, we'll talk to some people. Yeah, let's go do it. I'd love to.
This is miraculous stuff happening here, and nobody's even paying attention.
But that's the best work, unfortunately, sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The best work is the one that nobody sees.
But if more people paid attention, then it could happen in more places, and it could spread across the country and across the globe, and we could finally fix this thing, Lucky.
Right. No, I agree, Brenda. Well, so you gave me the idea, and we'll make it happen.
Okay.
Let's make it happen.
Cool. Yeah. So you got that. So
I'll do my best. No promises, but I'd love to. I'd love to come down and see what you're doing in Baltimore just for a week.
It's just. What can I say? I'm all right. So I want to hear about Auntie Nae's Village because I'm obsessed.
Right.
I think that what was able to be created and then grown and just blossomed into this. When you were even just talking about the services that she and her family were providing to people, just out of the kindness of their hearts, like housing for housing insecure people and food and all these things. Tell me more. I can't I can't stress enough how beautiful this kind of project is.
So, at Auntie Village, there's a saying that we have, it takes a village. And it really does. And I'm very grateful that I've been involved in a process as empowering and as significant and as loving as Auntie Village. And again, I was but one small part of it. There are people who dedicated the better part of their lives. Ed Ponte is a great person I'd love to highlight. He's an architect from Britain who came down to Detroit because he saw value in being able to be on the ground and help people who didn't look like him, who he had nothing to share with and had nothing in common with, but spent so many years of his life building and providing excellent opportunities, from our community garden to the nutrition house to the medical house. All these different aspects of the village that people have enjoyed and utilized throughout the year have come from someone who isn't even from this country. And to me, that's phenomenal to see, because it demonstrates that people are able to give back to communities that they might not even see a certain degree of relation or familiarity with, but can recognize the value that something like Auntie Village can have. And so I could talk your head off for days, Brenda, about all of the stuff Auntie Village has accomplished and worked on over the years. But the simple matter of fact of why I think it's so valuable is it is a shining example of what one woman and a small group of individuals who are committed to an idea can accomplish in an area that has largely been left behind and forgotten. And if you tell me that it's not possible, all I have to say to you is you're wrong. And I know this because I've seen it with my own two eyes. When someone tells me it's not possible for people to improve the places that they call home and the people that they call their neighbors and their family, you have to go and see it for yourself. And that is what Auntie Village has. It's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. During COVID, we were delivering tens of thousands of pounds of food a week to families across Metro Detroit that were transportation and food insecure. We offered all sorts of public health services. We did tutoring lessons. We created a walking track. We had community gardening for the kids that they were involved in. And all this was done because one woman said, I want to help the people closest to me. And that's it. That's all it took. That's all it took. And I consider myself to this day so fortunate that I ended up getting involved, that I decided to stay in Detroit for medical school, and that I was able to be witness to all of this and learn the lessons I have, because I know that for the rest of my life, they'll probably be the most invaluable aspects of my character. So it's an excellent organization. And like you said, Brenda, there's a million more like them in the United States waiting to be discovered. So that's what excites me the most about a place like Auntie.
Yes. And I mean, so I mentioned that I'm obsessed. So obviously you have to introduce us. It's just
would love to. Yeah. Auntie Nay is a salesman like no other. I don't think there's any person that I've met who is as loving of the kids in her village and as good at describing the work that we've done as anybody. She truly is the maternal figure for everybody in that village, all of us included who worked with her. And I would love to, and I'm sure she would love to as well.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Wow. This has been, I mean, it's just,
it's what was expected. I'm telling you, it was expected. It was expected. Ain't nothing to it, right? I told you it was expected. We just have to make it happen.
It's been great. I mean, honestly, some of the stuff that we've talked about, I don't think it's being talked about. Agreed. And hopefully this show will spark, more conversations like this, because, and to have somebody from the medical profession say some of these things, some of us who aren't medical professionals, we say some of the stuff that you've said, but is it really valid if it's coming from me? I mean, but
I wouldn't say that, but right. You get the people.
If you or Dr. Mills or Dr. Batiste, if you say, these are the issues with the medical industry, then folks are going to listen. And that is, again, that fills me with hope. And so I'm so excited that this show is happening. I'm so appreciative that you have, taken time out of your busy schedule.
I'll do it 1,000 times more.
Oh my gosh,
you don't have to ask again. You call, I'll be there. I told you that since day one when we met. I knew. So
and I mean, other people heard you say that, so you can't take
That's right. I'm on the record now, unfortunately. So
it's been amazing. amazing. Oh my gosh, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to this show with Dr. Lakshman Mulpuri. I probably screwed
You
it
got
up.
it. You got it. I mean, hey, it took a little practice, but you got it. So.
And I can't wait to just continue to talk about these issues. We're probably going to end up on a panel together very soon. And and let's just keep doing this work. It's so important, and I'm so glad that you are in it.
Of course, I don't see a better place for myself.
Thanks for tuning in to Food and Justice with Brenda Sanders. See you next time.